Okay, great. Well, I'm going to get us rolling because we already have a critical mass and all of our panelists are here and settled in. So first off, let me welcome everyone to this webinar on lead service line cost efficiencies. My name is Marc Santos. I'm a water consultant at the Environmental Policy Innovation Center, and I'll be keeping us moving through the webinar today. We've got a quick 60 minutes to get through a lot of material. And this is an important week. It's important for lead in that it is Lead Poisoning Prevention Week. This happens to be a very important month for lead as well, in that it is the month in which we had our initial inventories submitted for lead inventories. And it's also the final lead and copper revision or lead and copper rule improvements, or LCRI, was rolled out this month. So a lot is happening in October, and this is really just the beginning. We know there's a lot more work to be done. And really much has been made of the challenges around lead service line replacements, but we wanted to create space in this webinar to talk about solutions and talk about best practices. So we've got a quick kind of run a show agenda for you here today. We'll kick off by introducing EPIC quickly and talk a little bit about the resources the team has developed and that are available to all those that are working on lead service line replacements. We'll do a quick little poll to hear from you. And then I'm excited that we have three utility leaders that'll be presenting on how things are going in their communities with their lead service line programs. We'll break out into a Q&A panel, and then we'll close out and let you know what resources are available to you going forward. So the two, I guess, high-level comments I want to make, one is we cannot see you all. We're using a webinar format because of the number of participants we're expecting, but we do have the chat live, so we would love if you can drop messages in there if you have relevant comments, if there are any materials or resources that you think others would like to see. This is about peer-to-peer sharing, so feel free to drop anything in the chat that you see fit. And secondly, importantly, there is a Q&A function in Zoom. It's a little Q&A sign. And we just ask that if you have questions, if you can submit them through that Q&A function, it allows us on our end to collate those questions. And we'll be answering a lot of them, or as many as we can get to, in the Q&A portion of today's call. But anything we do not get to, we're going to try to address those questions in the follow-up materials that we'll send out. So 2 reminders, feel free to use the chat. And secondly, please submit your questions to the Q&A function just so we can make sure it gets covered. So with that, I'm going to transition. It's my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Maureen Cunningham at EPIC. She is the Chief Strategy Officer and Director of Water. Many of you know Maureen. She's been a champion for lead service line solutions for several years now, but some of you might not know that Maureen also focuses on these solutions on a local level as her role as a council member for the town of Bethlehem in New York. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Maureen, to share more, and welcome everyone.
Yeah, and I don't want to give anyone the impression that behind me is the town of Bethlehem. I'm not in Bethlehem right now. I'm in Manhattan, so that's what you see behind me. Before I tell you what we do at EPIC, I wanted to tell you why we do it. We see too many red lights when it comes to environmental problems. And as a nonprofit, EPIC wants to turn more of those red lights green. And we do that by focusing on solutions and really paving the way for less bureaucracy and cost efficiencies is the topic of today. Our mission is speed. And so what this means for lead service lines is we want the pace of replacing lead service lines to match the urgency of this problem, because it's not just a problem, but it's a public health threat. EPIC's work is a combination of technical assistance and data-driven policy. I think we're unique in water teams because we have a team that focuses on both. And I really think this strengthens both the policy work we do, which is ground truths by our folks on the ground delivering direct technical assistance to communities. We have an incredible team. Some of them are here today of engineers, data scientists, policy analysts, community advocates, and municipal experts. I'm really excited about this call because we have our A team on the call for lead, starting with Palencia Mobley, who's on our technical assistant side of the team, serving as our Midwest funding navigator manager. She's helping small and medium-sized utilities on a variety of infrastructure needs and challenges. She also has lived experience as a utility manager, as the former chief engineer for Detroit Water and Sewerage, and she'll be on the panel. Next up, we have Erica Galante Johnson, who's our policy leader on lead service line replacement policy. She manages a lot of the data analytics as well as tracking of lead service line replacement. Marc, you've already seen and met. We are happy to have Marc on our team. He's focused on collecting experiences, interviewing utilities, and lifting up case studies from utilities to document lessons learned and some of the efficiencies we're going to be talking about today. Valerie Nguyen supports on so many initiatives. So glad to have her on this call. She's helping us track legislation and funding initiatives through the water infrastructure funding. As I mentioned, the technical assistance is a big part of our team. We're actually part of the EPA's Water TA network, delivering direct technical assistance across the country, currently working in about 59 communities and water utilities in about 23 states on a range of not just lead, but other drinking water, stormwater, and wastewater projects. For lead specifically, we're helping communities and water utilities develop inventories, engage with the public, apply for funding, and develop plans for replacing lead pipes. You can go to our website. We have the QR code. I think somebody will put the link in the chat as well to link up with our technical assistance, or you can follow up with Palencia after the call.
Thank you. And I think we can turn it over to Erica to talk a little bit more about our analysis work.
Yeah, thank you, Marc. So I'm going to talk a little bit about EPIC's policy and data analytics work. One of our big focuses is tracking the bipartisan infrastructure law money. As we all know, this was a historic investment in drinking water, stormwater, and wastewater infrastructure. And more specifically, what we do at EPIC is tracking where these funds are going, if they're going out efficiently and equitably. Next slide, please. When it comes to lead specifically, one of our focuses at EPIC is to ensure that the lead is getting out quickly, efficiently, and equitably. The way we do this is by elevating what we perceive to be best practices, innovations, and cost efficiencies across, in our conversations across the country with utilities and other water professionals such as yourselves that came here today. So out of these conversations, a couple of the outputs that we have put out there are some policy briefs on cost efficiencies that utilities can adopt for the lead service line replacement programs, as well as a technical advisory toolkit. And coming out soon, I believe next week, if I'm correct, we also have a contracting guide that is highlighting some language that might be useful when, engaging with contractors in your lead service line replacement programs. One last thing that I want to plug before I pass it over to Marc is that we are working on launching the Lead Innovation Hub, which is going to be a website in 2025. And we're considering this to be your one-stop shop to find all the resources that you might need to really hit the ground running and achieve that 100% lead service line replacement, to be in compliance with the lead and copper rule improvements, which were announced a couple of weeks ago. And we're going to be adding all these resources in the chat, so don't worry too much about following along. Thank you, Valerie. There they are. And I'll pass it over to Marc now.
Thank you, Erica, and thank you, Maureen. Yeah, there are quite a few links that are being dropped in the chat. We don't expect you to look through them all now. Fear not. You can always go to EPIC's website under resources, where we have those briefs, the blogs, and explainers, a lot of resources that are available to you. And then you can always submit questions as well. We are going to transition to polling. It is certainly that time of year where polling is on top of everybody's mind. But despite how you might feel about national polling, I think you could feel comfortable with what we're about to do here, which is soliciting information from the group we have on the webinar. I'll ask Valerie to drop a link in the chat to what we're going to use, which is Mentimeter, to ask these questions or perform this poll. You can also use this QR code in the next 10 seconds if you're able to pull your phone out quick enough. But again, the link is in the chat. And I'm going to ask everybody to direct your attention to there where you can submit responses to the poll. So the first question is quite straightforward. We want to know where everybody is calling in from. So if you select Menti, you should have the opportunity to drop a pin. It looks like folks have already figured it out. If you have multiple maps, it's going to be the one on the bottom. So we'll give everybody just a moment to let us know where you're coming from. Okay, we're seeing a lot of folks in the Great Lakes region, in the Northeast, the Midwest. Shout out to California. Got a few folks from there. Louisiana. Excellent. All right. Oh, Texas. Well, I didn't mention it. I'm based in San Antonio, Texas, and I didn't drop that pin. Looks like somebody maybe in the Austin area. Okay, so we've got a pretty good spread. Frankly, this is not surprising because we know where there are high densities of lead service lines around the country and those that have already been underway with performing lead service line replacements. And this is a good indication of where we've got folks. And I think for our panelists, it's a good mental note to know where folks on the call are calling in from. I'm going to go ahead and advance us to the next slide for a quick response. So this one is a question around where are you currently getting your lead service line information from, whether that's webinars, blogs, yeah, wherever you're currently getting resources. I want to give folks a moment to drop in your answers and see what's been helpful. Everywhere. I like that. It does seem like it's everywhere, doesn't it? Okay. Looks like we've got a good number of responses here. Yeah, all right. So it seems like winning out at the moment per the word cloud is EPA, consultants, and technical advisors. I think that might include technical assistants, so we'll cover that later. And then also a variety of other conferences, which is helpful. Okay, well, thank you all. I'm going to proceed next to our next question, which is, this is to get a sense of where in the lead service line replacement journey you are. So if you're a utility, it's pretty obvious where you are. I'd say if you're a consultant or you are maybe a state administrator, if you want to give an average for the people that you work with, what stage they're pretty much in, just to get, I know some folks on the call aren't utilities, but just want to see where the individuals are in this path. I'll just give this another minute. Okay. Well, it looks like we've got a pretty good spread for our panelists to consider. I suppose nobody is nearing the completion of their replacements because they probably wouldn't be on this call if they weren't looking for solutions. But it looks like we really do have a spread pretty evenly across. Oh, wow, we have one person. That's great. Thanks for being here. Maybe you can share some experiences and lessons learned in the chat for that individual who's nearly completing all their replacements. But yeah, just note that we've got folks still in the inventory stage, and I think we're going to touch on things that are around ramping up programs as well. So I think it'll be applicable to everybody on the call, which is great. And one final question we have, we know there are all of the challenges around lead service line programs, but we wanted to provide an opportunity to have a little bit of ranking for you to maybe pick your largest pain point or your few largest pain points. You can rank all of the options or just select a few, but we wanted to see which are sticking out to you or are really top of mind, providing you heartburn at the moment, and we can try to give that airtime to address them. I realize it's difficult to get people to rank all of the things that are in front of you at the moment, but we appreciate these submissions. Another few seconds here. Okay. Well, thank you all for submitting. I'd say for some, this might be surprising, but I think from the Epic side, we're not necessarily surprised to see these results based on what we've heard from utilities. A lot of the business of the day, getting property access, collecting right to entry forms, and getting the community engaged are extremely important. And I know we'll talk a little bit about those and hear from our speakers on those topics. Well, let me thank you all for indulging us in that activity. I think those results are more useful to us than you might think, just to understand the priorities and how we produce resources for the utilities and practitioners that are out there doing the work. So thank you all for taking the time to do that. It's my pleasure to now introduce our three utility speakers that we'll be hearing from. We've asked them to provide a very brief overview of some cost efficiencies, time efficiencies, and just lessons learned from their individual programs. I'm going to give a quick introduction to all three, and then we'll hear from them all three in a row. The first we're going to hear from is Nora Bertram. Nora is the utility director at the city of Elgin in Illinois. She's a trained engineer with over 20 years of experience, and she's been serving at the city of Elgin for 10 years. Among other responsibilities that she has, she oversees what's going on with the city's lead program, and they have approximately 30,000 service lines, and about 1/3 of those flagged as lead service lines. So Nora will talk about the impressive work they've been doing ramping up their program. Next, we'll hear from Kevin Kappers. Kevin is a principal engineer in the lead program at Greater Cincinnati Waterworks in Ohio. He's been at Greater Cincinnati for 6 years and brings 14 years of experience in the sector to his program work. And this Greater Cincy program has been going on since 2018. So it's got a history of program successes, and they have about an estimated 35,000 lead service lines still remaining. I'm not going to steal any more of Kevin's thunder. I'll leave it at that. And lastly, we have Mora McLaughlin, who is the construction comms project manager at Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority in Pennsylvania. So Mora has been a part of Pittsburgh's community-led response since its inception back in 2016. So another series of history of successes and lessons learned coming from Pittsburgh. And she leverages her training as a communicator and marketing professional to provide support in the development of policies and materials in their lead program. So as you can see, 3 different locations, you'll hear 3 very different experiences and how these 3 utility leaders are tackling lead service line removal. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and give you control and pass it over to you, Nora, so you can take us away.
All right, thanks, Marc. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to all of you today about our experience with lead service lines in the city of Elgin. So Marc gave you a little introduction into our statistics. We have about a little over 10,000 service lines, lead service lines still remaining. I'm going to talk about our contract evolution. So 2022 was the first year we started replacing full lead service lines. Prior to that, just brief description from 2019 through 2021, during capital projects when lead service lines were disturbed, we would present the homeowner. In Illinois or in our community, we have public and private service line locations. So we do have owners who own from the B box into the house. We would present those owners with 3 opportunities. They could either, we explained to them the dangers of lead, the dangers of a partial lead service line, and the goal to replace a full lead service line. And we tell the owner, you could do it yourself, and the city would do our part. You could do it yourself using a city-provided loan for 10 years, 0 interest, and the city would do our part. Or you could sign a waiver saying you understood the risks, and the city would provide you with a filter, and you would commit to using that filter for 2 years. As you can imagine, not many residents took us up on the option of the city provided loan or replacing it on their own. We had about 430 residents impacted, and only 60 of them voluntarily replaced their lead service line. The rest of them said, we understand the risks, but we're not doing it. In 2022, then, we started with a full lead service line replacement program where we actually went in and replaced the service line, the public and private side. We got a principal forgiven loan from the IEPA for that, using, I believe it was using bill money. And we went through and went back to all those 370 service lines and replaced them, the private side, in using that money in our first year. We also started an emergency project where we would replace, when a service line had a leak on either the public or the private side, we would go through and replace all of the service line. We also had a combined sewer separation project that year, and we replaced the full lead service lines using that project as well. The emergency in 2022, we received our ARPA funding, and the City Council of Elgin elected to dedicate $13.5 million of our ARPA funding to lead service line replacement. So that emergencies in 2022 were funded through the ARPA funding. And then the big ARPA project started in 2023. So starting in 2023, we ramped up our program from 500 approximately lines to over 870 total lines. We got another principal forgiven loan from IEPA. We used that for 1 contract. We did split our funding for contracts because there was different requirements for different funding sources. And then we did an emergency project again, where we had the contractor do the emergency replacements. And then we had 2 ARPA contracts. We did a big one and we did a small one. The reason why we split that up into 2 contracts was we want to get contractors working in Elgin who might not have experience doing big lead service line replacement projects. So maybe they've done a project with 10 lead service lines, or they haven't done any and they're just underground contractors. But what we want to do with these small contracts is get the contractors, the smaller contractors, the contractors with less experience in replacing lead service lines, so that as other programs are ramping up in surrounding communities, we're not all competing for the same contractors. So in 2023, we used those various funding sources and those various contracts and replaced 881 total lines. This year, our current project year, so we received 2 DECIO grants earlier in the year, and we had a deadline to use the DECIO grant funding by June 30th. So we expanded the contracts from 2023. We gave them change orders to replace the DECIO funded lead service line replacements. We then used more ARPA funding for a contract. We also had a IEPA traditional loan from the bill money for $11.1 million that we split into 2 contracts, again, a big contract and a small contract. We're currently working through all of these projects. And then we have the emergency contract again. And our goal for 2024 is to hit over 1,000 service lines replaced. And then going forward in 2025, we have qualified for a $2 million principal forgiven loan. We have another DECIO grant. We have a congressional spending grant to use. And then we're hoping to get another interest-free traditional loan. And we are going to be doing combined sewer separation again next year and replacing lead service lines through that. So those are kind of our contract evolutions. The cost efficiencies. So a lot of our areas where we're replacing lead service lines also have water main replacement that needs to be done. So our 2024 program, you can see in the upper left, the orange areas are where we are replacing water main in conjunction with doing lead service lines. So only digging once and doing all the work in the neighborhood. The 2025 projected project, we'll be replacing the water mains in that area that's bubbled down on the right and doing all the lead service lines there. And then our 2025 combined sewer separation project will also be including lead service line replacement. So bundling the projects helps from a cost efficiency standpoint. A big goal that we have is to combine our sewer infrastructure, our water infrastructure, our street infrastructure, and our lead service line replacement program so that we're only digging once in each neighborhood. That's a pretty lofty goal because we have a lot of work to do, but we're working through that. So our lead service line replacement process that we go through. This summer, what we do is our plan our project area for the next year. In fall, we start sending out letters to the impacted residents. In winter, December and January, we do public meetings. We usually do one public in-person meeting and one virtual meeting and try to hit multiple times, one in the middle of the day, one in the evening. In winter, we also start our door knocking. This is our big push to get people to sign their temporary construction easements. This is the most effective way to get people to sign their construction easements. We'll get a big bunch of people at the beginning. They've been waiting for it. They get the letters and they're excited. But we have a lot of residents who are unaware of the program, don't open their mail. So we start knocking on doors. Once the project starts, once it's awarded, the contractor will send out letters saying, hey, we're going to be replacing your service line. We're going to come look at your house, and then we're going to schedule a replacement. What we've learned through this is there really aren't any shortcuts that we have found that work really good to reach our residents. We do a lot of mailing, we do a lot of social media, we do TV, we do radio. The best way we reach them is by knocking on doors and then by doing public outreach events. Here's an image of us with our Glow partner at our farmers markets. And we have most people come up to us and say, hey, what's going on? What's with lead? What's your program? So that's the, fortunately, that's also very labor intensive. So, you know, getting people aware and getting people engaged is our challenge.
Thank you so much, Nora. Like I said, we've asked everybody to be very brief, so we appreciate you sharing that overview and the evolution of your program. I know we're going to have questions on that. I will just remind folks, as you have questions for Nora or for Kevin or for Mora, please put them in the Q&A. Thanks for those who have already submitted them. And yeah, we've got a few we're already looking forward to asking in the Q&A session. But yeah, appreciate it, Nora, and good to know that, yeah, farmers markets are how we're going to change the world. I firmly do believe that. I will go ahead and we're going to pass it over to Kevin now to take us through what's going on in Greater Cincy. Kevin, so take it away.
Thank you, Mark. Again, I'm Kevin Kappers. I'm the lead program manager. I oversee our lead service line replacement program. So we've been operating our program since 2018, as Mark mentioned. We've done just over 6,000 replacements to date and have 35,000 to go. Move on to our slides. So our service lines, dual ownership. We own the portion of the right of way, the customer owns the portion on their private property. Right now, our replacement rate is about 1,200 per year, but we're in the process of ramping up to meet future regulatory needs. And we do those replacements in 3 methods. One, alongside our water main replacements, we have an individual lump sum item for the private side replacement at each house that has a lead service line on that project. So that's incorporated in the contract at the time of bid. We also do individual replacements called one-offs. That's for if there's a leak on the service line, an individual with an elevated blood lead level, we get a referral through the health department, or we offer free testing. So if their testing comes back above the action level, we'll do an individual replacement. And we bid those out individually to a small group of pre-qualified contractors. Sorry about that, skipping ahead. And then as we grow the program, this third contracting method, whole block service line projects, that's really going to pick up the pace of our program. That's where we've done the water main at some recent time in the past. There's no public lead anymore. It's just whole streets that we need to go and clean up and get the private lead service lines replaced. So a couple methods and lessons learned through the program in the past. Obviously, working alongside water main replacements or whole block service line projects, that's where you're going to get the highest efficiency, the best pricing, economy of scale, right? So maximize that work when you're there. So what we've done is we've created a repeatable outreach process that kicks off shortly before a project goes out to bid. So my team goes through a process that involves calls, texts, mailers, community council meetings, social media posts. There's a repeatable process there that we know it's going to happen shortly before the project gets awarded. So it's about a 2 to 3 month process to get through those early stages of the outreach. And right now we're getting about 80% participation with our voluntary program. Second, it's kind of counterintuitive, it seems like, but on our water main replacements, something we learned from the get-go was we had to set a minimum price for these replacements. We were having contractors bid $0 or $1 just to win the job and actually try to get out of the lead service line replacements at the tail end. And also the early part of our program was a cost sharing model. So we were having some residents with a free service line and their neighbor has to pay some money. So we just nipped that in the bud and made a minimum bid for all those replacements. The one-off replacements, that's your lesser efficient replacement since it's individual. So have some clearly defined reasons why a one-off would be initiated. It's hard to tell someone when they're calling that, sorry, we're not in your work area, but if you have some defined reasons why you would initiate a replacement and they don't fall within that, you can fall back on those rules. And then whole block service line projects, our effort's going to be to vary the size of the contracts. Workforce obviously is a concern, and contractor capacity. Anytime you can diversify or lower the barrier of entry to get more contractors involved, that potentially maximize your contractor pool. And then prioritize your work areas. We've got a lot of work to do. So we got to have a defined way to know where we're going next. So that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit next. So how to prioritize our replacements. So we teamed up with the University of Cincinnati School Planning to create a prioritization model that's based on trying to find populations most vulnerable to lead so we can replace their service lines first. So what UC did was they pulled existing lead programs across the country and talked to community health organizations and came up with 12 factors for prioritization you see there. All of that information is publicly available through the different organizations, including the census, the local health departments. So we elected to go on a census block level prioritization. And what that does is gives us individual prioritized areas that are very manageable. It's a couple streets at a time, rather than a whole zip code, which may be very large. So we can go down that list and initiate projects of manageable size based on that prioritization scoring. So that's been very successful as we start ramping up our full block service line replacement work.
All right.
So I flew through that. I think that's it that I had, Mark.
Yeah, no, it's great. Thank you, Kevin. And we have some questions in the chat, but I think it's interesting because more often than not, the discussion is around how much are your lead service line replacements. So having to establish a minimum to try and make it so that, you know, contractor can't buy a job is an interesting flip on the typical question that we always see in here. I'm sure there'll maybe be another nuanced question around that as well. But appreciate it, Kevin. We'll dig into that more in the Q&A.
Sure.
But yeah, I want to elevate Mora, give you an opportunity to share around what's been going on in Pittsburgh. So I think you should have control if you'd like to take it away now.
Sure. Thank you so much. My name is Mora. I'm a construction communications project manager at PWSA. As Marc mentioned, I've been part of what we call our community-led response for several years now. So I'm just going to run you through some of the efforts we've made, policy decisions we've made from the perspective of public affairs and communication. So a little bit of background. We have about 80,000 water customers, over 116,000 total customers. You see on the southern portion of the map here, those are sewer-only customers. And the blue shaded areas where we serve water. We have about 961 miles of water main in the city and about 83,000 total water service lines. Now, we've been at our program for a little while now. I'll tell you about our progress to date, but as of right now, we're well over halfway done with our lead service line replacement program, and we estimate through our machine learning models, through what we've seen out in the city to date, and what we have in terms of physical records, that we have about 6,000 remaining lead service lines. Now, similar to what Kevin and what Nora described, we have a few approaches to lead service line replacement. The one that probably is the most productive is the neighborhood lead service line replacement. We have a similar approach to Cincinnati in that we have a prioritization model that helps us select work areas and kind of bundle them into contracts to put out to bid. In the neighborhood program, it's very straightforward. We go out in a given area that we've bundled several city streets into. We identify service line material through a test pit, usually in the sidewalk, to see the service line and confirm whatever record we had existing. And then we work with our customers to replace either the public, the private, or both sides of the line, depending on what the material is, at no cost to the customer. We also do water main upgrades around the city. We try to replace 6 to 12 miles of water main per year. Pittsburgh is a very old city. We have aging infrastructure, and typically we find where there is an old pipe, there might be a lot of lead attached to it. So this is, of course, a very efficient way of doing that work. In terms of upgrading all of the water infrastructure on a block at once, repaving the street, and knowing that we're not going to have to come back and dig anything up maybe in the coming years. We also have an urgent contract. We call it the urgent contract. That is a one-off program. Our condition for that contract is a leaking service line. Perhaps our operations team has been called out. They find lead on the pipe. They might replace the public side, but we have this urgent contractor to come in to handle the coordination process with the customer and replace that private side. So there's no partial replacement that gets done, and we can get that lead out of the ground. We also use that contract when we have pesky properties who have taken several lead water test kits and we're seeing a high level of lead and we're not quite sure why. Maybe it's low volume of water getting to the pipe, maybe it's low use in the home. But whatever the reason is, it's just better to get rid of that pipe. And as I mentioned, when the public side is replaced, and we need to initiate that private side, we will work with the customer to do that. and vice versa. This is something I wanted to touch on in terms of coordination with customers. I saw in that poll that a lot of people are concerned about property access and outreach around these programs. We've done something a little bit unique in that we have what we call a lead help desk within our customer service team. This is a team of people that is only dedicated to lead service sign related questions. They help us collect all of the temporary access agreements. They do outreach to locations that have not returned or have declined the agreement. And they answer any questions that come in about water quality related to lead, requesting a lead test kit, anything related to the program. These folks are super helpful. And in coordination with that help desk, we have what we call lead help liaisons. They are actually out in the city in our work order areas, working with customers to coordinate ahead of replacements. So when replacing that private side, you will probably need basement access to do that. And every home is different, right? So our process is to have a coordination meeting ahead of the work, bring our contractor and the liaison into the home and speak with the customer to make sure they understand what to expect. This just kind of gives everybody peace of mind. There's a game plan for the day of replacement. There will be no surprises. And it's also an opportunity to look around the basement, see if maybe there's an existing leak or there is something that catches the liaison's eye. So we know after the work is done, we can be confident of what the state of the home was before the work and after the work. We also make sure there's translation services available in all of our written communications on our website and on the phone, just to make sure that the customer service experience as they go through this process, which can be disruptive to people's lives. We require a couple of days off from work. So we just want to make sure it's as smooth as possible.
Well, thank you, Mora. Yeah, I think it's unique. Not everybody, I think, has that kind of that help desk one stop to be able to allow residents to call in and get what they need. So I think it'd be interesting. Maybe we can unpack that a little bit. But we are right on time, actually, for what is my favorite part, a Q&A, because we don't know what we're going to be answering, but we've already gotten some great questions in the chat, or excuse me, in the Q&A function. Please do continue to submit some more questions. Well, first off, thank you, Nora. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Mora, for the presentations. We've asked our colleague Palencia Mobley to join us on the panel as well. She was introduced very briefly earlier, but Palencia is the Midwest Funding Navigator Manager here at EPIC. But in her previous life, she worked in a utility role as the Deputy Director and Chief Engineer of the Detroit Water and Sewage Department. So of her many responsibilities there, being engaged with the lead service line program was included. So we've had a pre-discussion already and had a really good solutioning happening last week. So I'm excited to jump in with some questions for this group. I'm going to stop sharing so we can kind of see the folks that are talking. And if you're not on the panel, feel free to shut off your camera so we can focus on those that are going to be answering questions. I'm going to start off with a first question for you, Nora, from City of Elgin, that came in from the chat around contractors. So I think you commented a lot on, I think, the great work you're trying to do to upskill contractors, get them at least used to doing contracts. And the question was around really how you're able to ensure kind of that they're performing the work, the quality of work that they should be performing, especially if they're doing it for the first time. So I don't know if you have any thoughts or comments on that, and welcome in from the rest of the panel.
All of our contractors are supervised out in the field. We have engineering, resident engineers out with them every day, supervising or observing everything they do. Then we have the plumbing inspector who does come in when they're doing the private side to inspect that. We also have city staff who is present during every replacement. They are there during the home. Our city staff is there during the home assessment and then also during the replacement. So the contractors aren't out there doing this on their own ever.
Thank you, Nora. No, it's important to have those checks. Any other thoughts from the other panelists? Anything else you all are doing?
So I think for places that are small, one particular option, if you do not have the capacity to have staff out in the field, is to have a third-party contract. And that contractor would be independent of the contractor doing the work. and could do the investigation services as well, or inspection services, I'm sorry, during the actual prosecution or implementation of that work. So that's another alternative for people who do not have the capacity, any staff, to monitor the work.
I will second that. That was Pittsburgh's approach, and we have a pretty large inspector pool. We do an annual training on the lead program. We bring them all in. There's actually a test at the end. If you don't pass the test, you don't get to inspect lead sites. So a lot of checks and balances in place, which has been really helpful for us.
Yeah, thank you all. Yeah, and I know there have been some opportunities for documentation software or things that different utilities are looking into to help alleviate the paper burden, as it were, information burden that is part of capturing that everything has been done appropriately. Wanted to jump into a question. I guess maybe Kevin, I'll put this one to you because you talked about a low bound for the cost of replacement, and we could potentially round robin it, but the question was around what the typical cost of replacement is that you're seeing. And I don't know if you want to talk about public versus customer side or full line replacement, but there was a question around costs.
Sure, yeah. So it's helpful to know that we're 3.5 feet deep for our minimum depth in Cincinnati. So I think that weighs heavily on cost. We're averaging around $3,500 for a private replacement.
Thanks, Kevin. Does anybody else care to share? I know it varies widely, but yeah, feel free to chime in.
Sure, I can share. So we're 5.5 feet deep, so it probably does have some impact on that cost. But for our one-offs, our emergencies, it's typically we budget around 15 for the full. We range on our private side, we estimate about 5 to 7. So our program, we usually are around 10 for the full service line with our neighborhood program. So obviously economy of scale.
Thank you. Yeah, all right. That gives you a range, and that's pretty typical for what we've heard. I think, yeah, full lines from that 8 to 15K full replacement. Obviously, it depends the size of your contracts, whether it's an emergency. But hopefully that answers the question that came in from the audience. Thank you. Have another question here around the timeline. How long is it taking your contractors typically to replace on the customer side? So if anybody wants to speak to that time frame.
I could speak to, so if they're just doing a private side replacement, which that's about 2/3 of our lead inventory, where we've already done our side at some point in the past, it's a matter of really just a half day of work to do the excavation and replacement and at least temporary restoration, sometimes restoration, final restorational leg, but the actual outage of water is very minimal to a house, maybe even minutes. So
that's great. Yeah, I guess another related question that I'll ask while we're on it is around the length of service line. I know this can vary, for really densely urban areas and others. I don't know if maybe Nora, you weigh in on that, and generally like the length of line that you're replacing on the private side, I'm guessing.
It's an interesting question. I probably don't have the exact answer to that. It really depends on where the water main is, if it's long side or short side. I mean, we could be private sides, anywhere from 10 would be probably the minimum to 100-ish, if it's set way back or depending on where it comes into the house, and then public side, 30 to 60 feet. So.
Yeah, thank you. We have a question around navigating replacement in the light of having an action level exceedance. So I don't know if anybody wants to discuss, how that affects your program, maybe the speed at which it has expedited things, or anything you want to say. But not everybody certainly is in an action level exceedance. but many utilities are. So if anybody that is in an ALE wants to comment on that.
I can comment on that. That was what spurred the Pittsburgh program. We exceeded the 15 part per billion action level in 2016. I will say that, like, if that is your circumstance, certainly getting your water quality experts and people that can help get your corrosion control optimization is going to be huge. You want to get back in compliance in that regard as soon as you can. And it'll help you ensure that, you know, while you continue to replace your lead lines, people are kept relatively safe. There's no safe level of lead in drinking water, but gets that level back to a reasonable place. It definitely, this is something I've told people, and it's unfortunate, but I've noticed that people that are being really good and proactive about their programs have a harder time with outreach and awareness. If there is a silver lining to exceeding an action level, it means that people are really thinking about lead, take it very seriously, and wanting to learn more about it. So you have this captive audience that you can really leverage in that time period. So if anybody's looking like maybe that's going to be a reality for their water system, get ready with your public outreach. You're going to need to be ready to hit the ground running at community meetings, and really, like, again, leverage that captive audience. I will say that now we're kind of entering a new phase of lead service line replacement. There's more stringent regulation with the new lead and copper rule. So just make sure you're reviewing that really well, understanding all the new standards that you're going to be expected to meet in the event of an action level exceedance.
And just one other thing to add with respect to action level exceedances, I'm not sure what protocols may be in place in your utility, but you may want to do another sample where the utility pulls the sample themselves. Some utilities, the customer sends in the sample based on, you know, you doing the protocol, but oftentimes there will be exceedances that will require you as the utility to set up something, explain to the customer again what not to do. You know, you can't, you know, run the water 6 hours, no flushing toilets, etc. And then you as the utility go pull the sample. Sometimes there were very drastic differences between a customer pulled sample and a utility pulled sample. Pre-changing the lead and copper rule and post the 1st and 5th liter draws.
I'll chime in on the action level exceedance because we're currently under one right now. So we are in the process of getting our corrosion control installed. We had the whole corrosion control optimization study we had to do. So once we get that under control, we are in our action level exceedance replacement rate, and it's been just kind of a flurry of activity surrounding that. So, but I do agree that with the action level exceedance, getting the community kind of thinking about lead has probably helped our case with getting interest in lead service line replacement and council interest in lead service line replacement as well.
And I'll just chime in as well. So we have not experienced that yet, but that makes an interesting predicament for communicating why it's important to replace your lead service line. It's a weird space to be in. If customers saying, well, my water hasn't tested high for lead, and now we're saying we need to replace your service line. So I don't know, it's interesting communication side of things.
Yeah, no, thanks for the responses. And in some ways it can be a help, it sounds like, to expedite the program. And in other ways it can be confounding. Yeah, the next question, on the scale of easy to difficult, I would put this one up on the difficult side. So I'm not going to pick on anybody specifically. I'll let you chime in. But I think it is a very interesting question, which is, you know, if there's not another federal appropriation of funding to replace lead service lines in the way that we've seen kind of the money coming out through bill, how does your city envision being able to fund removals of lead service lines? And yeah, I guess I'll maybe give you an out or something to consider is, has that been even a conversation? And maybe if you want to comment on how important some of the federal funding has been for your program. But yeah, I don't know if those conversations are happening internally, should the money dry up.
I can start, I guess, on that. So we've been educating the council since 2017 on the lead issue. So, I mean, we've been talking about lead a lot and stressing the importance. And then we've been demonstrating, we've been trying to get as much money as possible, but in the event 2027 rolls around and everyone needs money, we're prepared to make the case for rate adjustments to fund lead service line replacements. And we have that programmed in, so.
And I'll say, I heard an interesting stat the other day for the state of Ohio, that the bill funding available for lead service lines is equivalent to about $100 per service line in Ohio. So it doesn't get you very far. While it's very appreciated, obviously, but something's got to give there. So
I'll add one last thing. Before the bill funding started to become available, we were already tapping our infrastructure investment authority. It's good. It's almost like learning the muscle memory of applying for this money will be good regardless, because when that money is no longer there, there should still be some funding available. I think, maybe it won't be like the bill funding, but it's really good to go to your ratepayers and say, we're doing everything we can to find alternative funding sources for this. If there is grant money, we're going to get it. If there's a low interest loan, we're going to get it. It's still going to be beneficial to you to be tapping into those low interest loans and any free money you get regardless. And hopefully with the applications for bill funding, your team will be in a good kind of maybe quarterly biannual process of making those applications, and you can hopefully still continue to utilize some external money.
One other comment I'll make about that is just your overall fiscal and financial strategy. So you may choose to do your one-offs and as many of those as you can via some of the bill funding, just because those tend to be more expensive, and then do your more comprehensive neighborhood style replacement with a different type of source of funds, because those tend to be a total lower cost, spread across a larger project. So again, this comes into multiple strategies, but more often than not, most people are going to have to include this in their rates. And some will make the argument, in every place is kind of slightly different in how they interpret their laws a lot of times. But one thing is for sure, that lead in the system is prevalent. If it's prevalent or present, it's present for everyone. So it doesn't matter if it's on the public or the private side, it is there. And so from a funding perspective, you have to fund the total line replacement. And so it is a shared responsibility in essence of all ratepayers in the system.
Yeah, thank you for that, Valencia. And I know those are the conversations going on and that we're having with utilities across the US. So it's a very poignant question. So we appreciate that one coming in. Unfortunately, we are already at time, and we wanted to have a couple-hour meeting, but we know that everybody can't carve that kind of time out. But what I will say is we're gonna kind of try to answer the additional questions that we got when we send materials out. There's one that I do want to flag, which is around pay for success that came in as a question. And I want to put a plug in for a material or a resource we're pulling together on the contracting guide, which gives some examples of pay for success terms and thinking about alternative strategies like community-based public-private partnership, where you can achieve a few concurrent goals all at once. So we have more questions. Unfortunately, what we do not have is more time. But we appreciate everybody being here. I'm just going to kind of wrap us up with next steps, because I think it's important what you can take from what we discussed here today. First and foremost, we'll be sending materials around to everybody that participated and registered. So you'll see those materials and can follow up. We talked at the top of the discussion around resources on EPIC's website. That includes policy briefs, that'll include this contracting guide. It includes explainers around the funding coming out. And then lastly, if you do need technical assistance of any sort, whether it's planning, whether it's finding funding, please do feel free to reach out. The team's always available to meet with you and provide some guidance. And with that, I will turn it to Maureen for the last word in thanking everybody for attending.
Yeah, well, the last word is thank you. Thank you to Nora, Mora, and Kevin. We just truly appreciate the wisdom you've gained and want to share that out to more people. So thanks for your time, and thanks to the audience, because we know a lot of you are trying to figure this out. We would love